In content that is cut from the anime in Season 1 or Arc 3, we learn something pretty big about the world. The people who were isekai'd like Subaru and Al claim to be from beyond the Great Waterfall. That is because, allegedly, the ReZero world is flat. And at the four corners of the planet are rushing tides that wash away everything, falling off the world itself. There are, however, a lot of questions left unanswered about the extent of this world. The only detail we know prior is that 400 years ago, half of the world was devoured. When it says half of the world was devoured, we don't really know what that means either. This is when I present my absolute crackhead theory. While the story wants us to believe that the world is flat, doesn't it feel like there is more or something missing? Let's examine the Great Waterfall itself. All four edges of this world end with a huge waterfall that just seemingly pours down into an abyss below. Now, in traditional, real-life flat earth concepts, there is something at the edge of the world. Usually a giant ice wall that's supposed to be Antarctica, to hold in the ocean's water and I guess keep everything inside the flat disk. The ReZero world is the opposite. Nothing holds the world's natural resources in, and they are in free fall to supposedly nothing. Now, that's kind of raw, but it leaves so many questions. Namely, what pulls the waterfall down? In reality, every single atom has mass, and when you have a lot of mass, it warps the fabric of space around it. A good way of picturing this is to imagine a bedsheet that we will consider our fabric of space. If we were to scatter some marbles on it, you can see the dents each marble makes in space. If the marbles were close together, then the dent in fabric would make them touch. That is gravity. That is how gravity works in a 2D sense, as gravity in the real world is 3-dimensional and pulls in every single direction, not just across a plane. In a flat space, it's not really clear how gravity would work. Everything pulls towards the center of the globe. It's how people can live on anything but the equator, but there is nothing that indicates that for the ReZero world. The counter theory is that Ode Laguna, another cut thing from the anime, the mechanism for the world that allegedly runs the show, is responsible for artificial gravity. In a fantasy world that is fully possible, but even then we have to wonder where that gravity is created. If a central point that acts as the world's core is chosen, then there would be a lot of issues for people living on the planet, but additionally, the water of the Great Waterfall would be flowing inwards towards that central point instead of off the edge. The second option is that Ode Laguna has made it so that the entire planet, or disk, is sort of the core where gravitational pull occurs. This possesses other issues, of course. First, this would make it so that instead of falling off the edge of the world, you would simply walk on the side of it and then the underside, as you would now be pulled up, since up is relative, like how it works already in real life. We already have an example of somebody who was supposedly thrown over the Great Waterfall, and as far as we know, she didn't start walking on the underside, but she fucking died. Secondly, if the entire planet acted as the gravitational center, that would make it so that the water, instead of cascading into an abyss, would then be promptly pulled up to hit the underside, forming an ocean of sorts underneath the planet. The gravity of the ReZero world doesn't make sense. Something is seemingly pulling down the water from the Great Waterfall. The real-life counter-argument for actual flat Earth discussion is that, actually, the planet just moves up very fast. There are a couple of issues with this. First, what is up? Secondly, what is causing that motion? You could of course say, Ode Laguna, and there's really nothing that can be said about that, unlike in the real world. Now, of course, it would be completely fair to argue that one is looking too much into it. However, one could say that for a lot of theories, and it's not a lot of fun as a response, really. What we can do, however, is incorporate the author into this discussion. Tappei Nagatsuki is very much into astronomy, so much so that, as you have likely noticed, his work is chock full of references to other celestial bodies. Subaru is a reference to the Pleiades' Seven Sisters. Al being a reference to Aldebaran, the following star that chases the Pleiades throughout the sky. All of the Saint Archbishops, and so many more references. He clearly knows his stuff, frequently referencing the sources for the mythology behind constellations, or even how some stars got their name, even referencing stars that the average person most definitely would not be aware of, like Zeta Ceti. Why would somebody who is so thoroughly well-versed on astronomy or topics of celestial bodies make something so unscientific while regularly including references to astronomy in his work? Of course, this is a fantasy world story, and to some extent, will always buck science. I mean, magic exists, and there will always be some kind of level of suspension of disbelief, so it's not really that big of a deal. I could very well just be looking too deep into it, but like I said earlier, it's fun to think. There is a Tappei Q&A from a while ago in which he goes more in depth on the issue. In it, someone asks him, quote, if the ReZero world is similar to the world of Rance, end quote, and he answers, quote, if you mean a flat world with cliffs at the edge, it's not a globe, but a diagram of the world would certainly look like that. It would be fine to think of it as a flat diorama world, end quote. According to some in the fandom, Tappei's Q&As are not bulletproof, and he has allegedly contradicted himself in the past. The one I'm aware of is that when he said the story will only take place in Lagunica. Plus, if there is some grand reveal that the world is more than just a flat plane, I don't think it would be revealed in a Q&A. I hope. My whole thing is, there has got to be more to the ReZero world than meets the eye. And my biggest belief why is the moon. The moon is a peculiar thing in ReZero. You can go through volume covers or illustrations, or even the anime, and you'll see it present. But you will note that in every time it appears in a picture, it's full. However, in the extra novel EX5, Al looks up from a balcony to note that the moon is half full. Additionally, in volume 1 or 2, I forget, there's also a scene where the moon is a crescent. Now, in a flat Earth model, the moon and sun are small 48-kilometer wide balls that are just floating above the planet in rotation. But if the planet is flat, shouldn't the moon be? It would be odd for one object in the solar system to be flat, yet here we are, allegedly. The only way a half moon is possible is based on the moon's orientation to the planet and naturally its curvature. For it to be a half moon, it would have to be in this position relative to the plane of the ReZero worlds, and it would have to have curvature that would not allow light to continue on past the body's halfway point. This is essentially definitive proof that the moon of ReZero isn't flat, and I reiterate, why would everything but the planet be a globe? And this is when we get to the biggest smoking gun for the flat plane of ReZero, which is also in the EX5 novel. In EX5, Priscilla also stands on a balcony, and the moon is red. While this could be done for atmospheric intent or just taken as an artist's liberty, I would like to reference Tappei's very intentional way of handling the themes of astronomy in this story. A lunar eclipse is something that happens when the moon is caught in the Earth's shadow, taking on a reddish color as the only light reflected from the lunar surface has been refracted by the Earth's atmosphere. Basically, the flat Earth theory that the moon hovers above the planet cannot lead to a lunar eclipse or a red moon, because there would be no giant globe to get in the way and to color the moon red. Now you might be wondering, how do flat earthers in real life explain the lunar eclipse? They believe a shadow planet exists that passes in front of the moon sometimes. So, realistically, the only way that could have happened is for the sun to be on the other side of, at the very least, not a flat 2D plane. So the real question is, what lies beyond? How does the world of ReZero really work? And, well, I couldn't tell you. There are a few guesses we can make with the knowledge we have, though. Number one, there is a possibility we take the words that Satella devoured half of the world literally, and the planet is now a floating husk that on the surface appears to be flat because it is quite literally destroyed. Now, this would not make a very stable planet, and it would definitely pose a lot of problems for the planet, so I'm not inclined to believe that half the world is literally missing. I, however, cannot deny the possibility, due to Ode Laguna shenanigans, however. Option 2 is that the world is something like Angel Falls, atop an absolutely massive waterfall, so massive that clouds and something like atmospheric interference don't really allow you to see the bottom. I think this is actually pretty possible, however the vision of this looks a little goofy personally, and it doesn't explain still the notion of destroying half the world or anything. The third and final option, which I believe to be the most possible, still not sure though, is pretty similar to the giant waterfall one, but instead of being on a huge cliffside, the world of ReZero we have come to know floats above the surface of a globe. You might be wondering how this differs from option 2, but this option has precedent, as this wouldn't be the only island suspended in the air. Echidna had one that hangs over the Great Waterfall. Now what do these two options entail for the surface below? I have no idea. The biggest potential hole in this theory is what exactly happened with Satella 400 years ago. Once we find out more, we'll be able to go more in depth on this one. So to summarize, the aspects of gravity but also the aspects of the moon do not make sense given our simple, unexplained knowledge that the world is supposedly flat, and given Tappei's wealth of knowledge on astronomy and the stars, and inclusion of many of those elements in the series, I think it's reasonable to infer that there is more going on than meets the eye. Doesn't necessarily have to be a globe, but I do believe there is something we're not being told. Okay, you can take off your tinfoil hat now. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, please remember to like, comment, and subscribe for the funny YouTube algorithm. You can check the description down below to follow me on Twitter, where I'm objectively correct all the time. You can also join my Discord, where we talk about My Hero Academia, ReZero, Jujutsu Kaisen, and stuff like that. And you can also now become a YouTube member, which basically just gives you access to behind-the-scenes content, a little badge on comments, and live stream chats, and access to some emotes. Only do so if you want to support the channel, though. But that's about it, though. Thank you for watching. See ya.